Being highly sensitive, it really, I think we're leading with the most important thing, which is it is not a flaw. It is not a character flaw. It is not a problem to be solved. I think it's something to be understood because you live in the world a little bit differently when you're highly sensitive than those who are kind of not as much that way. And it doesn't mean any of us kind of don't fall a little bit on that spectrum. But if you really truly fall in the probably what is 15 to 20% of the population that are highly sensitive, what that means is that there are some things that are true of you that are just not as true of people who aren't.
You guys, what a killer topic today. This one's close to home for me and actually most of the clients in my program. Highly sensitive people, highly sensitive men. It's funny. It's one of those things that actually, when I started diving into it, there's a ton of literature around it. But I would say before I went looking into it, I didn't know much about it. This was not something that was presented to me. And I think the thing that I want to start with at first is I didn't like the title. When I read the book and it was like, crap. I'm like, I met every criteria in there. And I'm like, I don't want to be a highly sensitive person, which was really sad because as the book went on, and the book I was referring to is Elaine Aron's, she kind of was the one who pioneered this whole concept of highly sensitive people. But when I read the book, there was actually a lot of superpowers that a highly sensitive person has. And so, so then by the time I finished the book, I felt very ashamed of being ashamed in the beginning of the book because it was like, man, you know what? How long have I been running away from my highly sensitive, my sensitivity, which we'll talk more about that later because I would love actually to get into that. But Mike, do you want to introduce Mike and then Jason, you can go after if there's anything Mike missed, but what is a highly sensitive person and why should we care?
Yeah, and I can so relate to what you're talking about. Even like, and Jason and I have had this experience in talking to people. I'll speak for Jason. I'll do that the whole time, by the way. But both of us, we're both highly sensitive, and knowing all that we know about it and how great it really is. I know what you're saying, Roland, because I still feel that twinge. It's like, should I say this? So being highly sensitive, it really, I think we're leading with the most important thing, which is it is not a flaw. It is not a character flaw. It is not a problem to be solved. I think it's something to be understood because you live in the world a little bit differently when you're highly sensitive than those who are kind of not as much that way. And it doesn't mean any of us kind of don't fall a little bit on that spectrum. But if you really truly fall in the probably what is 15 to 20% of the population that are highly sensitive, what that means is that there are some things that are true of you that are just not as true of people who aren't. And Elaine Aron, I'm sure you've seen this, Roland. She has an acronym as a way to describe it. So I can go through those and I can leave them half and Jason can do half. But the first is the depth of processing, right? So the acronym is DOES. And then there's one more S that we say at the end, but the depth of processing, which just means that like as you're going about in your world, you're processing things on a deeper level than those maybe who don't fall into the category. And that's what I mean by that is generally speaking, everything that you come in contact with, you have all these multiple layers with which you kind of experience it and think about it. And people who are not highly sensitive, they don't as often as much. Like it doesn't mean that they don't do that, but they don't do it as broadly as those who are. And that's really an incredible thing. It just also means though that there's more data and more information to sift and sort through, right? Because like instead of it being this, it's this with everything that you experience. So depth of processing is one. The next one is the one I think that we probably
I want to speak to that one too, because I think this is where most of my clients really resonated was, when you call them highly sensitive, I think all men, especially successful men, reject the title. They don't enjoy being called that. Here's how I get them all to basically admit that they're highly sensitive. Is that first point, Mike? It's not that you're highly, because Elaine speaks to this. She says, when you look at these people's nervous systems, they actually don't have, there's not really any markers that are that much different than a normal person. What we find is we think too much about shit. So if somebody was to criticize you, you may think about it for 6 days, 7 days, a month, maybe even for the rest of your life, constantly being conscientious of this. So I think I just wanted to put a pin in that. When you hear this, well, she's not really referring to you as being a sissy, a weenie. That's not what we're talking about. That you even feel more necessarily than other people. I mean, you do, we'll talk more about that, but a lot of it is this, I'm super sensitive. So I'm getting this feedback, this negative feedback, and I'm potentially processing it 20 times more than the average person, applying it to my physical appearance, my future safety, maybe applying it to some of the things I've done in the past. Right. So it's just this exaggerated processing. So I just wanted to put that pin in there because a lot of guys hear that and they're like, okay, shoot, maybe I am a little bit more sensitive.
Well, what I would add to that, and then I want to kick it to Jason, is really so many high achieving people are also high sensing, because that same depth of processing, when you apply that to business, when you apply that to relationships, like when you apply that places, it brings a certain richness and depth, right, to relationships, whether they be business, whether they be personal, whatever they might be. And so it really adds a lot to life. And that's where being, even though we don't love the title, being in this category, it actually can, that depth of processing can produce such amazing things and really creates a lot of high achievement, honestly.
Yeah. I would say absolutely to that. And yeah, I mean, I know everyone wrestles with the title. We had a run of t-shirts. They didn't sell well. So we decided we had to do something different. But at the end of the day, it's more true than not. And I think, like Mike said, this is often the hallmark of a high achiever, because they can go deep and they can fixate and they can really work through something. And I think used in the right direction, it's a superpower. But if it's used against oneself, I think what we end up doing is we generalize individual experiences into something bigger and into something about our worth and our value. And that's where it's highly problematic.
Jason, it's why I think so many high achieving men are so effed up. Is I think for the first 18 years of their life, they thought way too much about what anybody ever said to them. I mean, they just, I think I find them so insecure because, again, I think so much of this processing in a world where we don't do a great job of helping kids process, right? Like we don't ask them what somebody said to them. We don't ask them, historically, we haven't done a great job of getting these kids to really come home and process the data that was entering their day, right? So think about this poor, highly sensitive boy is internalizing insane amounts of data, most of which I would say, I'll speak for myself, I used against me. I would say 90% of the data I used in a don't do that again. Never say that again. Don't ever raise your hand and bring, it was used against me. I don't remember much in the first 18 years of my life where I used it productively. I would be curious, maybe talking about what we could do for the parents listening to this. How do you productively, but maybe we can save that towards the end. Elaine Aron does have her mentee, Tim, can't remember his last name, writes a book called The Highly Sensitive Boy. And it is actually targeted a little bit more towards parents. What I actually found was it was kind of cool to reparent myself listening to that too, because there's a bunch of things that I didn't get done that should have been done for me as being highly sensitive. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Jason.
No. I mean, I'm in agreement, and I think it's a bit of an art to know how deep we're supposed to dive. I don't think you just know that inherently. You have to be taught, and so if you're not taught, it's really, really difficult. It's kind of like when I go get a haircut and they take the clipper guard off. I hope they understand the art of using that well, right? Because there's such a thing as not enough, and then there's too much, and then there's exactly right. But I think that's kind of what we're getting at, is like that depth of processing. We have to be guided through how to do that well. And if you're struggling with this, you just always go a little too deep, right? It's just always deeper than it needs to be.
Yeah. Mike, take us on to what was the second one we were going to go down?
Yeah, the second one is, I think, probably the one that, at least for me personally, requires the most ongoing work, and that is overstimulation. And so what that means then is, the things that we take in from our environment, they have the capability to more quickly overstimulate our nervous system than maybe those who are kind of less on that sensitivity scale. This is, to me, I always think of the sharks, right? So if you know anything about sharks, they're swimming around and they're picking up like the electrical currents from prey and from things in the water. And they, like, and for highly sensitive people, we're kind of like that. We're walking around and we're picking up all this information, and we may not even, it doesn't even mean that we're processing everything that we're picking up on a conscious level, but we're noticing that quick twitch of that person's face, and like, what did that mean? And like, not only that, but sounds and everything can become too much really quickly. And so that our nervous system just gets all of a sudden just boom, like it fills up to the top and starts to spill over. And then, we do different things with it. And what we're going to actually, I know, talk about a little bit later is how we medicate against that. And unhealthy ways, we'll talk about what that looks like in healthy ways. But overstimulation is one of those hallmarks of this that I think is super important for people to understand, because if you don't know that you're highly sensitive, you may not know necessarily that. You may not have an explanation for, well, gosh, why? When I get up in the morning and I just kind of walk out and, there's a lot going on, why does that feel overwhelming sometimes to me, right? Because it really, for those who aren't in this category, it takes longer for them to get to that place. For us, it's a much shorter process. And that's what I've had to learn even much more, like well into adulthood, about myself, is what do I need to do with that? So that's the O part.
Yeah. And I think this is where, when we look at sex addiction, porn addiction, I think, to me, where this kind of starts on this point of kind of overwhelm and overprocessing is we get lost in thought. And I think it happens very early. And for me, at least, I mean, shoot, I remember it at like being like 7 or 8 years old and already being lost in thought, very unpresent. And I think it just kind of got worse and worse and worse. Being highly sensitive too, I think there's this overprocessing that can lead to an abandonment of self. I don't like how I am. I don't like who I am. I want to be better. I want to be different. And my mind became consumed with, how do I be better? How do I be different? How do I get attention, approval? And so, by the time I'm 12, I'm lost in thought. I'm not present. I've used most of it against me, right? So now, how much am I actually living my life for me with my morals and values? When I'm just lost in thought, I'm truly just grabbing anything and everything that comes. And so to me, when I'm watching a lot of the clients that come into my program, especially ones that I feel like are definitely higher on the highly sensitive spectrum, they're so lost in thought. They are desperate. They are desperate for attention. They're desperate for approval. And their high sensitivity is just grabbing, grasping. They're just not, their brain's not slow enough to make, in my opinion, to make a good decision. And so I think you find a lot of high achieving men acting very impulsively, compulsively, desperately, with just this overwhelming amount of data. And I think here's the missing piece, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but to me, where things finally shifted for me, I'm still highly sensitive. I'm not trying to kill it off. I do think it's a superpower. What finally changed for me, you guys, and I would actually like to talk about this, is context. When I finally formed a relationship with myself, understood what was actually going on with me, now the processing, I had context, I had a direction, I had something to use it for, to use it with. So I'm grabbing all this data and I was able to channel it somewhere. Whereas I feel like before I was 30, it was just so freaking compulsive. It was just too much information. Oh, she's hot, I'm going to go fuck her. Right. And just not, not even thinking about anything else, just so desperate. I would love to speak on that, because that was when it shifted for me. I'm still highly sensitive. It's just when I get the data, I feel like I have a reason to process it. I know what to do with it. Does that make sense? Right. I've tapped into my unique abilities. I know where I'm headed. I have a good feeling as to my purpose, my calling, why I'm here. And so now the data is not overwhelming. The data is usable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's, the journey you're really talking about is learning your own signal. So kind of like Mike talked about, if you're always hearing 100 signals, but you don't know your own, it's very confusing.
Yeah.
Right. And so the growth is, what is my signal in the midst of all these other signals, so I know which one to listen to. And I think if we don't learn how to do that, we just chase other signals. And doing that costs us a lot, because a lot of times it's coping, or it's making poor decisions, or it's doing things that are against what we would do normally, but there's somebody else's signal. So I think to your point, Roland, like as you learn your signal amongst all the other signals, it gets a lot easier, but you have to do that first.
So let's park on that though, because I think high achieving, and again, this is my opinion, I don't have any data to back this, but I think high achieving men they have a desire and a unique ability to influence, to lead, to change something, to find something's broken and fix it. It's just like inherent. You see them just gravitate towards people, tribes, places that are solving problems, whether they're solving it independently or joining an industry that's solving something. So, but keep this in mind, right? So you're highly sensitive, and you're in a country that society that has this overemphasis on materialism, power, domination, success, becoming 1% better every day. I mean, you grab your Instagram and it is just basically you suck unless you get this, and this. So imagine as a highly sensitive man, right? I've now grown up. I've used most of my highly sensitivity against me, destroying my sense of self, abandoning myself, wanting to be something better, greater, more confident, more polished, whatever it is. And now I'm in this world that is telling me and reminding me basically daily, every commercial, every Instagram post, the nonstop reminders of what I am not and what I don't have. So I want to, I think that's the challenge is, I have to fight to stay in line with my signal while literally in a crazy, busy, chaotic world where I'm getting 1,000 signals. And one thing I want to just add, all of those signals, I just want to empathize with the guys who have, I just want to empathize. All of those signals work. I just want to empathize. Like they're saying, hey, go get this and doors will open for you. And they do. Like when I got money, doors opened for me. I was treated differently. People talked to me differently. I was included to things. I was invited to stuff that I never was invited to when I was broke, right? So I think the hard part is I just want to empathize with some of the highly sensitive men out there, because a lot of the data, while it is other people's signals, it does in our culture open doors and create opportunities. And so I think I would just want to empathize there is like how hard it is to stay true to your signal as a highly sensitive person when so many people are telling you to follow other signals. Mike, can you kind of speak to the?
Yeah, and what I think would add to that, I know from my own personal experience, but I think this is true, especially of a lot of highly sensitive men, but it can be true of women as well, is that like one of our core wounds often is I'm not enough, right? Like I don't measure up. That's kind of what you're saying, Roland, but just in a different way is like, I'm not good enough, right? Because I think when you're going through the world as a highly sensitive person, frankly, in a world that doesn't always necessarily, especially for men, value that in the same way that it exists and manifests in our lives, then I think it can be very easy to turn that on yourself and say, so there must be there's something wrong with me, right? Because clearly the feedback I'm getting is I need to stop crying about this, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. And, some of those things are just typical things of being highly sensitive. And I know for me, the way I internalized that was that I wasn't good enough. Like I don't measure up. And I think for a lot of men, number one, I think for a lot of men, that's a core wound anyway. But I think for a lot of highly sensitive men, that's especially one of their core wounds. And so I think we are inclined to turn those things around. But like Jason's talking about, once you understand this about yourself, once you then can isolate what your signal is and can come to appreciate then that it's not actually about competence. It's not about like your core wounds. In fact, like we started with, it's really this really, really great thing that you can move about in the world with. Then that's when everything starts to turn, right? And for me, that's been a very recent experience of that. I spent so many years wondering why, this thing made me emotional or that thing did. And really, I'll say this part really quickly, but it wasn't until a conversation with Jason when I was saying to him, gosh, sometimes I'm just driving down the road and I just cry about something and I don't even, there must be, as a therapist, you're always thinking, well, what trauma have I not solved yet, right? Like what more work, what more intensives do I need to do? And those are all good things. And Jason said these life-changing things to me. I know you heard this, Roland, but he said, what if nothing is wrong with you? Like, what if this isn't a problem? And it really, like, even in recounting that now, it's like, what? It blows your mind. And so I want to, I want to give what Jason gave to me to everybody, which is, well, what if though nothing is wrong with you in this sense? What if this is actually something that can truly be a strength? I know for me, I spent a lot of years believing something was wrong with me. And listen, there are plenty of things wrong with me, but this is not what we're talking about. So
what you said, Mike, it's one of my kind of beefs with therapy in the psychology world. Is I feel like sometimes there's this like norm we're trying to get everybody to, and I don't think they mean to do it. It's certainly not. We want everybody to be them, but I do feel like, sometimes we demonize or pathologize something about someone because it doesn't mesh well with the way we've built this place. And I think that always bothers me is I think the thing that bothers me most about that is we didn't build this place very well. We didn't build this place for happiness. That's why we don't see a lot of happy people. We built this place to exchange currency and collect a portion of people's currency to be able to pave roads. And, but again, why do they pave roads? Why do we have cops? Why do we have police officers? So that you can put that fire out and get your ass to work the next day. I mean, we built this place so that people can get to work, make money, and we can take a portion of their revenue. It's just, that's what this place is built for. And so my point always is, we have to be careful, I think, pathologizing people's uniqueness, calling somebody, saying, oh, that's an inappropriate response. How do you know? How do you know? Maybe he's supposed to be maybe somebody's got to respond to that, because if it's a messed up thing, maybe if enough people are bothered by it, then they change it, they fix it, right? So I think, Mike, that's one thing I really notice when I look at people, even like bipolar and different things. I often wonder, do we just not see the utility in these things, right? Because these people process information and they say things, create things, do things that maybe other people wouldn't. And so I think sometimes we pathologize something when we don't really understand the utility of the uniqueness of this individual. And then we medicate them and force them to be normal. But I often wonder, I see this in the sex addiction space all the time. I think the way this world was built, I think there are men whose biology just gets trapped in the sexualness of all of this crap that's going on. And I don't think they mean to. I think just their genetic makeup, the way sex is just kind of used in our culture, it just messes with these men more. And I think for my guys, I think the thing I see the most is they find a lot of value in the attention and validation from women. And there's a lot of processing around that. And it's usually the hardest thing for them to let go in their recovery is, how do I stop finding this so valuable, right? Because they all do. They're like, oh my gosh, you mean to tell me I'm not going to be able to get all these women to tell me these things anymore? And they really are worried about it. But I think that's the challenge, is I think they need a lot of that, and our world just overemphasizes the value of that attention and admiration over more than others. So again, I think we pathologize it when I wonder if their biology was actually working just fine. We just messed them up because we have this overemphasis on the attention from females, right? If we never taught them that it was that valuable, would they have latched onto it? That's the thing I always wonder is, how much of this is the guy being a pervert sicko, and how much of this is the guy actually doing life well in a world that doesn't really value morals and values, right? And value, on one hand, we claim to value monogamy. When I look around, I don't see a world that values monogamy. I just don't. And so that's, I think, the problem is, if you're highly sensitive, there's these extraneous morals and values you're supposed to adhere to. But I think we're getting so much data. And I think here's what I'm trying to say. I think a lot of the data we're getting from this world is bad data, and it conflicts with the husband we want to be, the father we want to be, the man we want to be. And so I think as highly sensitive people, at least my impression was, I was taking in a ton of data that was shit. And unfortunately, it just really had a huge detriment on my life. Jason, did that make sense? Yeah. Is that clear?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I mean, I think a lot of the data that we take in then is skewed towards the negative. That day that I said that to Mike, I didn't mean to say anything life-changing or brilliant for him. I just honestly said the thing I wished I'd heard as a child.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, that was an easy thing to say, because I'd spent a long time wishing I'd hear it. And so I think some of this is giving people permission to be who they are and work from there, instead of starting with there's something wrong or bad about me and I need to solve it.
Yeah.
Because if I need to solve it, then I need to come up with an attempted solution. And that often leads you down a path you don't want to go.
Yeah.
And so I think, what's been really fascinating for me as a clinician, I know Mike does a lot of this work, is I give people permission to do what's normal to them. So sometimes I'll get a guy that comes in and he'll be tearful talking about something and just say, I shouldn't cry. And sometimes people literally pay me money to say, well, I think maybe you should. And it's a big deal to them because no one said that.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this part of us, especially if we have HSP, where we want to hear that it's okay to be us. And when we know it's okay to be us, we can operate from a healthier place.
Yeah.
Because we're empowered. And Mike, you have similar experiences with clients in this area, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think very much what we're really saying is that it's both. I think what we're looking at, like through the highly sensitive lens, and then other things that we're talking about is what are the adaptive parts of it. And I think we always need to keep in mind that so many of these things that we do that eventually become maladaptive, originally they were survival based, right? Like that's what we were trying to do. But that isn't to say, though, that when you get to a certain point, they're functional anymore. I think part of maturing is coming to the understanding, like that's not actually healthy for me anymore. I need to do that a different way. And particularly when it comes to addictive things and a lot of other things, I think the sign of growth is when you recognize, well, wait a minute, I wonder if there is a healthier way for me to deal with that. So where it started as survival, maybe now doesn't need to be. And even if it does, can I do that in a healthier form? And really with being highly sensitive, that's true too. I think with being easily overwhelmed and overstimulated by our environment, that then leads to more quickly looking for those fast medicators to try to calm that nervous system down. And there are really healthy ways to do that, but then there are also really unhealthy ways to do that. And I think the key, and I know that I think about this a lot just for myself, is, well, what are those healthy ways? And then how often, because you're never going to do it 100%, but like how often am I employing those healthy things? And so I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of us, but I want to point out that it's really both, right? We start with survival. That's what it is, because as a kid, that's what you're doing. At some point, maturity is about, well, wait a minute, though. I have now the license and the agency to make some different choices. And let me set up the very best for myself, right? And then pursue that. I think, and the beauty of especially high achieving people is often they're good at that. But I think it's also, Covey said this, like, be careful, when you're like climbing the ladder, what your ladder is leaning against, right? Are you sure it's leaning against the right wall? And so for high achieving people, I think it's a moment to stop and say, I know that I can achieve this healthy thing. Is what I'm trying to do the healthiest for me? And, I don't know. I think a lot about that.
Yeah. And I think too, it seems sticky. It seems for highly sensitive people, it's stickier. What I mean by that is like, when I think of almost like a belief, I like imagine like a neuro, like a pathway in my brain, right? And the more data I have thrown into that pathway, the stronger and beefier that nerve gets. And there's some truth to this. We've seen this when you use it a ton, your brain sees a ton of utility and value in it, and it becomes stronger, faster, more easier to use. I think with highly sensitive people, at least from what I've seen, is they have this pathway, and maybe for somebody who's less sensitive, it could be easier to destroy. What I find with a lot of highly sensitive people is they have been building that case on steroids. I mean, I'm talking like, let's say like I am socially awkward. Let's say that's a conclusion that they made when they were 8 or 9 years old. They, being highly sensitive, they have strengthened the case for that, like crazy. What to avoid. Oh, that person, the high likelihood of that person bullying me, I'm just not going to go over there. And I want to play this sport, but Trevor and TJ are playing that sport and they always are mean to me. So I'm not going to play. Right? It's just, so much thinking has gone into that. And then when I meet them, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and their life's blowing up because of their sexual compulsivity. And then you go into the root, and I find this just neural network that is just almost, it's like they're so convinced that they are socially awkward, worthless, whatever it is. And I find it very, I feel so bad for highly sensitive people because again, they've got so much data worked against them. This is my own personal story. I feel like I have just this overwhelming resume. They can basically discredit any therapist in the world. I can discredit all of them so that I can stay worthless, shy, whatever it is that I'm convinced I am. Right. Mike, can you speak to, like, I know you do a lot of that work. Does that make sense? Does that analogy kind of, because I see these poor guys, I see them and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I hope this guy has enough gas in the tank, because it's gonna be a good decade for him to really get to the core of a lot of this stuff. So.
Totally. So, well, it's confirmation bias, right? So we take in information from our environment. For highly sensitive people, we take in a lot more information. So there's a lot more to sift through, but our brains are wired and really designed and created to be more aware and to store the negative experiences, because the idea is, well, if my nervous system records that negative experience, then I'll avoid that in the future, right? So unfortunately, we're more inclined to recognize and to store those negative experiences we have more so than the positive. And so the confirmation bias is, as you do that enough times, then you begin to expect that, whether it's beliefs about self or beliefs about others in your environment. And that's where those guards and protections come up, right? Because I don't want to get caught off guard. And we know from a nervous system perspective, I use this a lot with my clients. I say story follows state. We often talk about, like, the state of your nervous system is going to inform the story in your head, pure and simple. So if you're in a fight or flight response, that by design is going to very much influence the way you're filtering the data that's coming into you. And guess what? It's probably not going to be super accurate. So you're going to see problems where there may not be. And that's that's highly sensitive people anyway, in some ways, is, reading. It's both reading, like, the room and the level of information, but it is also processing appropriately. Well, what does that look actually mean, right? Is my wife actually mad at me, or do I think that that's true? And, throughout my marriage, I've been like, well, I know you're mad. So what are you mad about? And my wife's like, I'm not mad. I picked up something, but I didn't interpret it correctly. And so this gets really complicated, right? Because in the communication process, we've got these multiple things going on. But I want to point that out for highly sensitive people, because you can't always just run 100 miles an hour with every bit of data set that you receive, because it's not always accurate. Just because you're picking up something, for sure, that's accurate, but interpreting what you're picking up is a different matter.
Well, and Jason, you work with couples. Wouldn't you say, as a highly sensitive guy who has now betrayed your wife sexually, what a shit show this environment you're going to be in. You're going to be getting you're going to be getting a lot of data, and some of the harshest data. I don't know. I think recovery after Discovery Day was probably the harshest data I've ever had to process. I'm going to a 12-step meeting, which I never imagined I would ever step in a room like that in my life. My wife is calling me things that I never dreamed my wife would call me. Never dreamed. It's just, and again, the intensives, it was, as a highly sensitive dude, recovering from this with my wife. It was it was probably one of the most, no, not probably. It was the most overwhelming situation I've ever been in. And Jason, you work with couples. Have you seen, is what I'm saying accurate, right? As a highly, it's already a bloodbath. And then as a highly sensitive person, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just, it's the hardest year of my life. No question about it.
Yeah. It's absolutely. And I think what's really hard is that these beliefs, like you said, they're not written on paper, they're written in concrete for people with this. And so how do we challenge that belief? And then the struggle with couples work after betrayal is, what do I do if some of what I sense is accurate? Right. So we spent a lot of time talking about, what do we do if we're skewed towards the negative or it's wrong? But now what do I do when I think they're mad at me and they are, right? And they actually have a really legitimate reason. Now what do I do with that really hard feeling I don't want to feel, and I feel it deeper than I'd like to, right? And so that's often sort of the challenge that I have with couples is, first, we have to teach that person, how do I sit with their emotions about what happened because that's often a really difficult place for them to land because they don't know how to do it for themselves. Right. And so the coping came from them not being able to do it. And now their person has feelings. And so how do we work through that? But yeah, it's hard when you really sense that, because I'll sometimes work with couples where the guy will catch that before she's even said it. She'll say it eventually, but he's already received that. And so then how do we let her feel that on her own time without jumping to that place, and then sit in that difficult space? And that's not easy for anyone to do, regardless of HSP or not.
Well, let's put a pin in that. I want you to keep, I have a follow-up question for you, Jason. Like, here's the other thing is a lot of the stuff you're seeing is true. I was a liar, a big liar about big things. I paid for sex, which is freaking disgusting, so dehumanizing. Like I made another person do something for money that they probably didn't want to do. Like, I mean, I'm facing stuff, Jason, as a highly sensitive person, that is validating shit I do not want to validate. I do not want to be a liar. I always considered myself a man of integrity. Most sex addict, I would say 100% of the men in my program considered themselves to be a man of integrity. Now I'm getting a ton of data that is indicating I'm not an honest man. I am not a man of integrity. Some of the stuff I've done is some of them is really inhumane. I mean, it's stuff you just shouldn't do. You shouldn't do it to your wife, and you shouldn't be doing it to other women. I mean, a lot of this stuff I'm seeing about myself, I'm starting to realize, I'm like, I'm not love avoidant. I'm love avoidant now. It's like, crap, God damn it. Then I turn another corner. It's like, oh, by the way, you also are afraid of people. And you're the reason you try so hard to make money and look so good is so that you can insulate yourself from them. I'm like, crap. Okay. And then here I am trying to give empathy. Well, it turns out I don't value empathy because it was never given to me. So I don't see any utility in those statements. And then I turn another corner. My point is, it's like, I got so freaking overwhelmed, Jason. I felt like I was in this maze that I thought was like kind of big. And then like, I feel like every time I turned a corner, I realized that I was in like the world's biggest maze of all time. And I just wanted to speak to that and empathize with it, because I think as a highly sensitive guy who's facing all of this, meanwhile having a kid or two or three, a wife, sitting on the board for this, like to already struggle with, because I think highly sensitive men already struggle with insecurity and some imposter syndrome. Now it's like my worst nightmare just came true. I've always worried that I was full of shit and a phony. Now I'm like, gosh, I'm way worse than I thought I was.
Yeah, that's no easy task. And I feel for you, my friend. And what I love about you is you did the work and you're walking in it, right? So you didn't just do it and then leave it. You're still doing it today. And I mean, I think that's the message the clients we work with is this is going to be a lifelong thing. What's always interesting to me is, D-Day is often, or Discovery Day is often when we come face to face with the signals we chased that weren't for us, right? We have to own that part. And so there's all these different things we did that weren't really all of us, but they were part of us. And what's always interesting to me is that I would say the vast majority of the time, the person you're with, your spouse, your partner, they actually love the real you if you haven't even figured that person out yet. So you might be unsure and you might just be consumed with guilt. But at the end of the day, they love the real you, no matter how messy it is. But your task is to figure out who that is. And so I think in this moment, it's completely overwhelming and emotionally. I mean, you think about if you're already sensitive to things like this, it's the worst possible thing to have happen. But what I often see, just kind of out of the corner of my eye, is I see someone looking at that person who's coming face to face with what they've done, and they just love them. They still love them. And I think for a person in that spot, usually the hardest thing for them to receive is the truth that they could be loved even though they've done the things. And that's actually, I mean, the strangest thing is that's where I see most couples get stuck, is someone being unwilling to receive the love that they have available to them if they just receive it.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's the challenge too, is being an over processor, right? It's like, wait, I'm a no, it's like, no, I remember I'm a monster. I could have never loved you. You wish you never met me, right? Like I did not forget any of the things that were said to me. And I think that's the challenge is here we are 4 years, 5 years later, 6 years later, 7 years later. And yeah, as a highly sensitive person, it's like, hey, my story is still, hey, yeah, you stayed with me, but you're with a monster. You're with it, and I think I think our work then is to your point, you got to let that go. I do. I think at year 2, year 3, the men become the problem. She's actually at a point where she's actually ready to kind of shift into another gear. And I think men oftentimes, highly sensitive men, they're just still stuck in this. Well, I'm just such a piece of trash. Like, I'm always going to be a piece of trash. It's just they just like shifted into this unproductive gear that I think then starts almost driving. It's like in his delusion, she's still the problem because she thinks this about him. The irony is, I think she's really kind of come a long way and is open to changing the tone and actually do it. But he's so fixated on, no, like this is what you think of me. And now we need to make the best of this. And how do you make the best of being in a relationship when your wife thinks you're a monster and she wishes she never met you? I don't think you can. And so I think our work then becomes letting that go. Which is hard. Hey, Mike, in this last 13 minutes, I just want to make sure that we talk about things that we need to talk about. What do you think is the most important for people listening to this?
I think we should finish the acronym. So let's finish describing kind of the hallmarks of highly sensitive people. And then maybe with what we have left, we can, maybe talk about really the really adaptive ways to use it. What we're talking about actually right now without saying it is the next part. So we started with depth of processing. We moved to over kind of stimulation. So this acronym is DOES. The next is E, which is actually what we're talking about. And that is emotional responsiveness and empathy. Mm-hmm. So highly sensitive people are higher on the emotional responsive scale. They're higher on the empathy scale. And, we, I think very appropriately are talking about how powerfully difficult discovery is on everyone, right? And no matter if you're highly sensitive or not, but for highly sensitive people, of course, they're going to take that data so much more. It's just like so overwhelming. But the thing that's so interesting about the recovery process is, I think you're right, Roland, as you get into year 2 and as you get further into this, for highly sensitive people, if they can utilize the ability to empathize, which is that is a hallmark of a highly sensitive person, and that emotional responsiveness, they actually have an incredible recovery potential with their spouse, because the way to recover from betrayal trauma is to have someone that is present, emotionally available, and empathetic, pure and simple. Like that is how you do it. Not doing those things then is the way to slow and mess the whole process up, right? Because if you think about it, the problem, of course, initially is I wasn't present. I pursued the wrong things and they weren't you. And so now though, if I'm really, really present and emotionally available to you and empathetic to what you're going through, the recovery process is like throwing gasoline in a great way on a fire. It's just boom, it takes off. So all that's to say, emotional kind of depth and processing and empathy. That's the E part, which I think is important for people to know if they're highly sensitive, because it actually is, while it creates more things to operate in the world by, it's an incredible thing. And it makes really, by the way, really, really good leaders, because you don't have to teach them EQ. You don't have to teach them emotional intelligence. They understand it. Right. And so I would posit, I feel like I'm in this category, a lot of successful leaders, especially of organizations, like they understand the emotional component. And that's a beautiful thing about being highly sensitive.
Yeah, innately, right? I mean, it's like, it's not, and I want to encourage the audience, like your wife has probably accused you of being unempathetic. I can guarantee it. What I have found is I am extremely empathetic. If I really let the weight of everyone's problems bother me, it can overwhelm the hell out of me. If I really let it in, if I walk through an airport, I could just be in tears of just, if you really feel it. So, but what I would say is, and then for those of you who have not listened to my podcast episode with Stevie Hall, I would highly recommend it, because Stevie's, the way she talks about empathy, especially within the context of sex addiction, recovery, and betrayal trauma, is so great. And Mike, what she talks about is, there's 3 different kinds, right? There's the one that the ladies all want you to do, which is usually the hardest one for us to do. But then there's 2 other, there's cognitive empathy and empathic action. And I would say a lot of men are actually really good at those 2. They're just not as great at the one that our wives want us to be good at. But I think, but my point is too, I think we can do empathy really well. But I wanted to just say one thing, Mike, to empathize with the audience is, you're also going to be extremely overwhelmed by this. And so what I find is I get accused of being, oh, you don't care. I say all this and you just sit there and say nothing. I'm overwhelmed. The data that was just given to me, I'm freaking out. I don't know what to say. There's a lot of truth to what she's saying. I hate what she's saying, but I agree with it. And so I'm just sitting there frozen. I can't be empathetic because it's information overload. And she's also poking on things that I really wish she wasn't poking on. And so I just, to your point, I at my core, when I've taken every empathy test quiz, I always score extremely highly. But my wife would tell you that I am probably one of the most unempathetic people she's ever met. But I think it's not like that. It's just in a high stakes environment. I'm just overwhelmed. I'm not myself. Right? Is I understand that, Mike?
I think that's really well said and a great point. And it kind of draws in, I think, everything that we've talked about today is that in order to function really well and to let being highly sensitive be a true strength, you have to account for the ways that are the weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And the weaknesses around what you're saying, Roland, are so easily overstimulated that certainly in an environment where there's trauma, of course, you're going to be very, very quickly overstimulated, and your body has to deal with that. Like your nervous system has to do something with that. And a lot of times it's about them being shut down because it's like so overwhelming. And so while the empathy is in there, and actually, ironically, I'm really empathizing. I'm empathizing so much that then it's causing me to shut down because I'm becoming overstimulated by it. To my partner, it doesn't look like that at all, right? And that's where you get that.
Oh, Mike, it's so true, brother. I'm sitting there like, I wish she could see what's going on in my head, because in my head I'm thinking, I can't believe I did this to her. I'm with her. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that I did the things that she it's like in my head, I'm on team my wife. I'm on her team in every way. The shutdown she's seeing is me in full agreement and disgust of everything and sadness and grief. I mean, I'm so sad I did this to what was a perfect marriage, perfect relationship. And now, we're going to have this stain on it forever. But what she see, head down, me staring at a spot in the ground, just thinking. Jason, before we go to the last one, Jason, do you have anything you want to add to that before we?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the points you're making are really good ones. You have it. You do have it, right? It's not discussed the way that they'd like to hear it and verbalized the way they'd like to hear it, but it's not because it's not present, right? I think, unfortunately, what happens is we get so overwhelmed that it becomes about us and our response to being overwhelmed instead of verbalizing the things we need to. And so sometimes I'll hear a spouse say, it's always gets turned to be about you. Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes it is because we're so overwhelmed, right? And so until we can get regulated, it kind of is about us because we need to be regulated first before we can speak to it. Mm-hmm. And so some of these coping strategies is learning how to do that well during or before we have that conversation.
Yeah, you're a highly sensitive person and you're insecure, and then now you have somebody who's saying, I mean, it's not a great recipe. If you want your husband to show up in his greatness, this is not a great recipe. Here's this person who struggles with insecurity and not enoughness. He's highly sensitive, and then now he's in this arguably part of the most unfavorable environment ever to be at his best. And so I think, one thing I've noticed that now my wife and I are, years and years and years into this, the therapy and everything we're doing is different. It's, hey, how do we create an environment for her to be in her best and me to be in my best so that we can actually constructively deal with this? And I think that's just, it's impossible to ask a couple to do that inside of the first year and a half, probably inside of the first 2 years. There's just so much hurt and so much intensity. But for the couples listening, if you do have an interest of getting into this constructive place, I would the more you guys can really honor the uniqueness of the other individual and tee them up for success. If you want this guy to empathize, create an environment where that can happen, because I think a lot of the times where these betrayed partners want it the most, they accidentally create an environment where it almost is impossible to happen. And again, it's not, I'm not saying the partners need to, I get it. They have every right to express their emotion, but I think in this dynamic, we have to consider these unique things about these other people. If you want that response, it's in your best interest to create an environment for that. And I get it. Inside of that first year and a half, it's almost impossible. So I empathize with everybody listening to this. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm not telling you to criticize your wife, or I'm not telling the partners to criticize their husband. That's not what I'm saying. The more and more we can add some of this humanity back into this situation, the better the outcome. Mike, take us to the last acronym.
Yeah, the last one is, we've really talked about it. It's sensory sensitivity. So in other words, sounds, lights. My family makes fun of me because like someone slams a dish and I'm like, what the heck? What's going on, right? It's like there's a lot of sensitivity to external stimulation, and that can be like data, people talking, but it's also it's all sensory input things, right? It's all the lights and the sounds and all of that. And so that can certainly be good. It also, though, can lend itself to being overwhelmed, because again, like you're taking in so much information that your brain is having to sift and sort through. And this one I find to be like sometimes a difficult one for me.
So I had a question on this. I actually wrote it down, so I'm glad we got here. So because I think this is a really important question to probably end with. So here's what I've noticed, Mike, I was highly sensitive. I wanted to be a firefighter when I was a little boy, like 4. Well, at the parades and the different things, that they would honk the horns and the sirens, and I hated that part. And so I was always I kind of hated myself, because here's all the other kids, the sirens, they have no problem with it. The horns, no problem with it. They're all clapping. The firefighters are throwing candy at the kids at the parade. And I wanted to be a firefighter so bad. And I would watch, my dad like edited the Backdraft movie and cut out all the adult pieces. It was like, I thought Backdraft was like 18 minutes long. And then when I became an adult, I'm like, oh, it's actually 2 hours long. But I just loved firefighter. And so I hated myself for that, because we would see it and I would love it. I'd be clapping. But as it got about 100 yards away, I would always tell my mom, hey, can we go in the car? Can we go somewhere else until it passes? Karate, I had to quit karate on the first day because they scream when they do the punching stuff. And the yelling, I started crying, and it was so I hated myself, because everybody else got to do karate. I'm not getting emotional thinking about it. Everybody else got to be a firefighter. And I couldn't handle it. And there was tons of stuff like that. Tons of stuff at church. Something that's like broke, and I didn't even break it, but I was just scared that it broke, because I knew there was going to be cleanup and problem. And I was crying, and I was embarrassed. None of my other friends, some people were laughing. So again, my pinata, we made a pinata. I was too sad to hit it and break it, because I just didn't want to beat this pig that we made, because it was so fun making it, and to hit it with a stick was just sad. So my point of all this, Mike, was I want for everybody listening, like I forgot I was highly sensitive, because at a certain point I decided, fuck this, fuck that kid. I hate him. He's never going to make it in this world. He's such a wussy. So I became somebody who was not highly sensitive, I thought. And so I just wanted to kind of end at this point. I would love both you guys to speak on this, because it was not until literally 4 years ago in my recovery where I started to discover that I was highly sensitive. And so many therapists were telling me, Roland, I think you should look into this. And then I remembered, before I hated myself and abandoned all of that and hardened myself, I was highly sensitive. So I would love to speak to this. For the guys, can you remember how sensitive you once were? And then, I think the last thing I'd say before I turn the mic over to you guys is, it saddens me, Mike, because I wonder how different my life would be if I stayed highly sensitive and embraced it. I wonder, how different am I now? How off course am I? compared to where I was supposed to be as a highly sensitive person? How am I squandering my unique abilities? Are the people who need me who I'm not serving because I've hardened myself so much? It's a sensitive topic for me, but I just want to speak to that because I think a lot of the guys listening, they're not highly sensitive anymore is what they think. The truth is they still are, but they've come to convince themselves, oh, anxiety, I don't get anxious anymore. Oh, angry, yeah, I used to do that, but I don't get angry. Right? They've killed this part of them off. So I just love to kind of end with that because I think killing it off is a joke because I don't think you can kill it off. And I think it manifests itself in pathology, addictions, compulsivity, self-hatred. I think it just shows, I think the more we fight it, it shows up in worse and worse and worse ways. So I'd love to just kind of have both of you speak to that for a second.
Yeah, you act out what you don't work out. Right. And so if you go about trying to pretend, because it is a pretending thing that you're not highly sensitive, then you're going to have to act that out some way because there's going to be some type of energy that takes place as a result of that collision. I'm glad that we're ending on this because, what I would want anyone listening to this to kind of, if they took nothing, at least from what I've said today, away from is to embrace it. Because, here's the thing, Roland, like if you knew that you were highly sensitive, if you knew and embraced that all along, then you just put in earplugs and become a firefighter, right? That's what you do. Because when you accept these things that are true of yourself, then you can take appropriate steps to deal with the strengths and the weaknesses. When you don't accept, though, then you actually don't have steps that you can take. And so you're left with not doing things that you totally could have done. And that's not to say anything about career path. I think, Roland, you're doing exactly what you should be doing. But it is to say, I know for me, the more I have accepted the high sensing traits, then the more that's given me the option to take the steps I need to take to deal with those. So I wear earplugs when I need to wear earplugs, right? And then my world is much bigger than it would have been if I hadn't done that. Because I think we have to create a small world when we don't accept all the parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I was telling you before we record, it's why I moved to Sedona. I live and I don't have cell phone service out here. I chose an environment that was still, that was quiet, where I could be outside for basically 100% of the year in the high desert. And I did this intentionally because I'm a sucker. When people are driving Lambos and Bentleys, I feel like I need to have them. When people are, so I chose a place where people don't flex and it's quiet and you hike and you enjoy the outdoors because, to your point, I had to embrace my sensitivity. Otherwise I knew what would happen. If I don't embrace it, I fight it and I go dorsal. I act like I don't care. I act like I'm somebody I'm not. And that guy cheats on his wife a lot. Right. So it's like, okay, how do I be more sensitive? Where do I need to live? What kind of job do I need to do? What kind of environment do I need to create where I can be sensitive? I can cry. I can express myself safely, where I don't have to pretend to be somebody I'm not. Yeah. I love that, Mike. Yeah. Because it is. The more I suppressed it, the more I acted out. Yeah. Well said. Jason, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, I would just echo what was said. I mean, I feel like acceptance opens the door to improvement. Right. So if we can accept that that's how we're wired, we can improve and we can develop some of that and we can maybe sit in it a little bit longer. Right. But we can build on what we've started with. But I think if we refuse to accept that, we're just always running from it. Right. And that running over time causes a lot of problems for ourselves and for others. And so the acceptance piece is just, how do I work with what I have? A really practical example is sometimes I'll work with couples and there'll be high conflict and someone has high HSP. And so what they'll do is they'll say, we should have a really hard conversation at a loud restaurant. What could go wrong, right? So like, I really think we need to have this emotionally loaded conversation, and we're going to eat at a restaurant where I can't even hear anything you're saying. And there's lots of clanging around. And you just say, hey, if you accept that this is part of your life and you're sensitive to it, maybe a quieter place is going to be a good start. And so I think then we start to, like you said earlier, set ourselves up for success because we're able to be honest about what we need instead of running from it.
Yeah, well said. It reminds me of like, if we ever have something to discuss in public, my wife's always like, why are you being so weird? Just fucking like, look at me and talk to me. And I'm just like, why are we doing, my high sensitivity is like, hey, we can't be doing this here. I don't like, I can't be around other people and deal with conflict. It's just not, my system just won't allow for it. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up, Jason, because it is coming back to embrace this thing, build an environment, you and your partner, like, talk about this. This is something, this shit's important, because again, she's going to get a fraction of you. And then for the highly sensitive person, you're going to be a fraction of what you could be. So it kind of sounds like your book, Jason. On that note, if people want to get a hold of you two guys, Mike, what kind of information can they do to learn more about this? And then Jason, after that, how can they learn more about how you guys do work with people?
Yeah, you can find me at BethesdaWorkshops.org. Easy to look me up. You can find my email there. You're welcome to reach out and get a hold of me. Yeah, a lot of ways, but that's probably the best.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Jason, how about you?
Yeah, you can learn about me at jasonvr.com or on socials at jason.vanruler, where we, and Mike and I are doing a bunch of content on this, are actually trying to help people. How do we accept it? How do we work through it? And so we're just honored to be part of this show, Roland, and just love that you're talking about it for people, because I know it's helping a lot of people to have this discussion.
Yeah, I'll end with this. They say, I think Elaine says it's 18% of the population is highly sensitive. I found another study from, I'll send it to you guys. Can't remember if it's but they found it was like 98% of highly successful people are highly sensitive. So like, yes, it's a smaller portion of the population, but then when you go into leaders, entrepreneurs, influencers, change makers, almost all of them are highly sensitive. And I just wanted to end on that note too. Don't run from this. There's nothing shameful about it.
Right.
The tough guy thing, all that BS. I would say tough guys are going to change less people and leave a way shittier legacy than the people who embrace their sensitivity. You're going to leave a kick-ass legacy and people are going to remember you. Yeah. Being a tough guy who doesn't feel, there's nothing remarkable about that. So this was awesome, you guys. Killer conversation.
Thanks, Roland. It's great.
Thanks so much.